Okay, guys. So, welcome to the first lecture of international marketing. I'm going to try and keep these, relatively short and relatively reasonable. What I'm going to do is just kind of go through the slide deck. I've adapted the slide deck and tried to think of a few decent examples for each of the concepts in the chapter. And again, just have any questions on this material, feel free to email me. So the first chapter is just this very, very kind of broad overview of what international marketing is, or as the book calls it, global marketing, and why international marketing is kind of incredibly important. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a little bit of a history lesson on the history of international markets. We'll talk about some of the things driving kind of international marketing, these big global companies such as Facebook, Amazon, Walmart competing on a global scale. And we'll there is like an appendix of this chapter. I'm not actually going to go through that, and I'm not going to put it on the exam because it's a little bit too, pure economics. And when I've taught this class in the past, people have found that little section very boring. But feel free to read through the appendix. Okay, so what this kind of section says is that international marketing has been going around for a long, long time. It's not something that's kind of recent. The example given in the book was this Silk Road that connected like the Roman Empire, Roman civilization with Chinese civilization. I could give another example going even further back in the kind of the southwest corner of England. There's somewhere called Cornwall, and Cornwall was like well known for its tin. And in the ancient world, traders came up from Phoenicia, from the Mediterranean, and they traded tin with Cornwall. So global trade has been going on a long time, but since the Second World War, it really has exploded. Now, just to give you a few statistics that I just updated, global trade has gone from $7.6 trillion in 2000 to around $19 trillion today. So trade is growing. And not just trade in goods like TVs, cars, trade in services as well. So trade in services with baby marketing would be a service, management consultancy, accounting. These are all services. Now, if you want some, where I got updated these figures from, if you want some fun, fascinating facts on international marketing, there's a link there. And, it's the first week of class. You're a little bit bored. You don't have any exams left. That link will take you to the World Trade Statistical Review from 2019. And you have a lovely, I want to keep this page because I'm going to use it in a minute, but you have a lovely 200-page document on trade statistics. So you read that document and you'll have absolutely no trouble with this class. Now, I've just actually taken a few kind of statistics from this trade. This is the volume of world trade merchandise and how it's increased over the last maybe 7 years, from 2012 to 2019. And interestingly, we can see that the world GDP has been going up pretty consistently between 2 and 3% a year. And trade has been kind of increasing at a similar amount all up to 2019. And one of the things that happened in the 2019 was this kind of trade war between the US and China that kind of, I think it disrupted global trade a little bit. Now, I don't know what the statistics are going to be for 2020, but I can imagine that it's going to be a slight trade, kind of a pretty much downward, and a big change in the trend due to COVID. Okay, so a few little questions for you. Does the United States have a trade deficit or a trade surplus? Which country is the world's leading exporter? Which country has the world's largest economy? Which is the second largest economy? And which is the third largest economy? Now, if we were doing this in class, I like to pose some of these questions. I'd have the class have a little discussion, and then I'd tell you the answers. But here, just think about it and maybe pause the video. Okay, so the largest economy is the US. Second largest, growing rapidly, but still not the largest economy, is China. And the third largest economy is Japan. Though, Japan has been in an economic recession, kind of falling population, so it might not be the third largest economy for long. Now, which country is the world's leading exporter? Now, funnily enough, when I actually started teaching this class, like about 10 years ago, this was actually, I think it was Germany. But then it kind of rapidly got taken over by China. So going back to our fascinating statistical fact book, we can actually get the world's leading exporters here. And you can actually see that the world's leading exporter is China, followed by America, followed by Japan. And actually, funnily enough, we were talking about Germany. It actually has, for some reason, it actually has the European Union as one country. So we see the European Union is the second largest exporter, just behind China. And the largest importers, we have the United States, we have the European Union, then we have China. Now, if we to go into services, commercial services, and strangely here, Europe has actually been broken out. We'll see in services, United States is actually by far the biggest exporter of services, this kind of very developed corporate economy. Now, followed again for the economic size, the United Kingdom is very strong in services, followed by Germany, France. So these kind of quite highly developed economies. And importers of services, United States, China, Germany, and France. Okay. So in this book, we've got this kind of focus on big emerging markets. Countries, for example, large populations with rapidly growing economies, rapidly growing GDPs. Now, I would maybe disagree with South Korea here and Taiwan. They might be considered probably developed economies these days. But certainly we've got China, we've got India, we've got developing economies in South America, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina. We have South Africa. And again, Eastern Europe, maybe 10, 15 years ago would be developing economy, but a lot of Eastern European states, you would probably consider, they've not quite caught up with Western Europe, but you would probably consider them to be developed economies. Now, what I would usually do in class is I'd show you a few videos illustrating some of these economies. And in fact, I've got some videos on the last page of these slides. So if you want a kind of insight into some of these countries, then watch a few of those videos. And we'll be kind of coming back to this throughout the course. We'll be giving examples in a lot of these major economies. This book is kind of quite Asian focused. So there's a lot of emphasis on China, on ASEAN countries, such as Vietnam, such as the Philippines. But I try and balance this by giving a few of my own examples with a few more maybe in South America, a few more in Africa and Europe. So why is global marketing important? So let's just think of an example. Think about Starbucks. Going back a few years, so there was some criticism of Starbucks. You could go to like New York City and you could stand on a corner and you could see like 3 or 4 Starbucks. there wasn't really room for Starbucks to grow in the US. But there's all these emerging markets. You know, we have over 1 billion people in China, um, growing middle class. We've got a middle class of maybe 400-500 million people at least who will maybe be able to afford Starbucks products. So we don't see much opportunity for growth in the US. So we think about expanding to other markets. Kind of very, very simple. And maybe, say, for example, 2008 to 2010, US was hit quite badly by the recession. China was maybe not hit quite so badly. So let's move to an economy that isn't doing quite so badly. And another reason is we have this kind of intensifying of global competition around the world. Some of this is to do with the internet. If you think about Amazon, which has got, it's kind of a global online internet company. Some of it is not due to the internet. Think about maybe car companies. Think about, US car companies will sell all over the world. Japanese companies such as Toyota will again sell all over the world. So it's becoming an increasingly globalized world. Okay, so let me just pause, and I want to give you a little example here. Okay, so I just have drawn a little diagram. I wanted to illustrate this idea of global cooperation, and I'm going to do it with car companies. Now, originally I was trying to draw maps of US, Europe, and Asia, but they were actually pretty pathetic. So I'm just drawing circles, so I'm not going to embarrass myself. Now, the car company, all these car companies, major car companies, are actually competing with one another. But at the same time, cars and production platforms are very difficult to build and cost a lot of money. And so to avoid a lot of duplication of effort, we tend to get alliances between major car companies to increase economies of scale and lower development costs. So let's just think a major alliance. We have French. We have, let's have a different color. We have Renault. Okay, I don't know what happened there. Let me get back. That was very sensitive. So we have Renault. And we have Nissan in Asia. So for quite a while, we have this strategic alliance between Renault and Nissan, using similar platforms for the cars, sharing resources, taking stakes in one another. And in fact, we also had Mitsubishi that was part of this alliance, and Nissan actually bought these guys out. We also have, let's just have another few examples. I don't know whether to put this in Asia or US. We have Mazda and Toyota have been working together. And they're actually just building a factory in Huntsville. We have Fiat in Italy and Chrysler merging. I think I spelt that wrong, but never mind. And then on top of this, some of these really big commercial alliances, we also have some smaller ones. For example, Ford and VW have an alliance in the area of commercial vehicles. So we have, and there's a lot more of these alliances. I could get a messy map, the kind of the global car industry, we have all these companies that are competing with each other, but they also need to cooperate and join with each other in order to be kind of competitive in the market. Okay, so let's kind of go back to the slides. Okay, so we've already talked a little bit about the internet. We've talked about the need for cooperation, and we've talked a little bit about this is now a global world. You can't just kind of stick your head in the sand. You can't avoid it. You may be getting a competitor from another country, without even knowing it. To give an example of that, the US car companies got a little bit stuck in their domestic market, creating these large kind of SUVs. And when the recession hit in 2008 and 2010, they were pretty unable to cope with global competition. So let's just ask you a few more questions. Which is the highest value brand in the world? Now there's different ways of valuing brands. It could be on the number of people who've heard of it, how much equity we think the brand has, how much sales we have. But there's a few kind of well-known brand indices. Which is the number one offline retailer in the US? Which is the number one online retailer in the US? And have these retailers saturated the US market? Well, we'll start off with the retailers. The number one offline retailer is by far Walmart. And the number one online retailer is by far Amazon. Have they saturated the market? Well, in terms of actual physical stores, you could argue that Walmart is a pretty saturated market. To kind of carry on gaining marketing share, they've introduced a new concept of the smaller Walmart stores, but pretty much most places that could have a Walmart have a Walmart. With Amazon, it's kind of similar. There has been a general growth in e-commerce, so they can carry on growing. They've also had some online kind of offline integration with Whole Foods, but they could probably get higher growth in a developed market. And just kind of interesting, I found this is courtesy of Forbes, and I don't exactly know what methodology they use, but this is value of actual brands, global branding, and you can see that Apple is the highest value brand. Pretty much anybody anywhere in the world has heard of Apple, then Google, then Microsoft, then actually Amazon, and then Facebook. A lot of these traditional offline brands, such as McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Nike, I think that Eson, I'm not quite sure what that one is, Walt Disney, are just kind of not quite as large. So here's some interesting things. This is the world's largest companies. And in 1970, 2/3 of these companies were American. But go forward to 2015, and only about 1/3 of these companies are American. You could see from 1970 to 1980, you could see a growth in these companies in Europe, Germany, France, Italy, Netherlands. And then as we get into the 1990s, 2000s, and 2015, we now see that 17 of the world's largest companies are from China. So this kind of slowly, the United States is still the largest economy, but the world economy is becoming more equitable. So here's a little question for you. Which companies have started off in developing countries and moved to the USA? Here's a few examples I thought of. There's Lenovo, which is, they bought a kind of a Chinese computer company. They actually bought IBM's PC division, which was not profitable for IBM. So the kind of iconic IBM ThinkPad is now the Lenovo ThinkPad. We have Nando's, which is after my heart. Now, Nando's is huge in the UK, but this is kind of a South African spicy chicken place, and they've just begun to move in to the US market. We have Huawei, which I've probably pronounced it correctly, which a telecommunications company. You just search Google News, and it's quite a controversial company at the moment. So you'll find lots of information on that. And something a little bit different, Tata, which is this kind of Indian conglomerate, and they actually bought. They bought, for example, car companies such as Land Rover. They also have a lot of food products. So if you drink Tetley tea like I do, or you drink 8 o'clock coffee, these are actually Tata brands. Okay, so convergence and divergence. I'm going to go through the concept and then I'll give you a few examples. When your country is very poor, so think of like a very, very poor country, maybe Afghanistan. Your GDP per capita is less than 10,000. The majority of the country, you know, they're just focusing on trying to feed their family. They have very little disposable income to do what they want to do. You know, they can't, it's not like I'm deciding, oh, do I go out to the theatre or do I go out to a bar? I'm just trying to kind of feed my family. But as the per capita income reaches 20,000, then this disposable income increases dramatically, and we get more of a consumer culture, and we get more consumer buying behavior. But when the book means convergent, it just means that these kind of these patterns are happening all over the world, and they're happening in a very similar way. And this almost happened post-war in the US and the UK. We had this consumer culture. We had this idea of teenagers in the 1950s and 60s, suddenly young people with a lot of disposable income, buying a lot of products, and the whole culture kind of started around this. And if you want to watch a very cheesy video on youth culture in the UK from the, I think, 1960, I've got a link below. So none of these video links are on the exam. They're just kind of purely for enrichment. So as we get kind of higher incomes and higher education letters, we have more leisure time. We begin to think a little bit about, you know, what do we want to do with our free time? Do we want to watch sports? Do we want to indulge in healthy activities, gym, yoga? Do we want to maybe learn a new language? We have all these choices. Now we have to remember this book is very pro-globalization. So this is really, I'll just kind of, I don't like doing this, but I'll read this verbatim. Globalization does not suffocate local cultures, but rather liberates them. But just kind of, this book is a pro-globalization book. So consumers now have this kind of wider, more divergent set of goods to choose from. If you think in the US, again going back 50, 60 years, you wouldn't have ethnic restaurants from all over the world. You wouldn't be able to try all these different sports from all over the world. You wouldn't be able to maybe try Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for example. So consumers all over the world have this similar choice set. They can all eat Chinese, Indian, American food, go to Irish pubs, but individual consumers are diverging. You might have somebody in China who likes soccer and likes to go to Irish pubs, and somebody else who may, you know, more appreciate traditional cultures. So here are my little examples of consumers' divergence and convergence. So we have people very into the Japanese anime culture in the US. We have people in China very strongly into English Premiership. I would call it football, but soccer. We have Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the UK. And we have an Irish pub in Mongolia. So that is convergence and divergence. Okay, so we've talked already quite a little bit about a range of multinationals. You know, I've mentioned some of the big car companies, I've mentioned the big internet companies, I've mentioned some of the big retailers. Now, multinationals actually manage around 2/3 of the world trade. And a lot of that is kind of, internal. A company would actually, Toyota in Japan would actually export to Toyota in the US. So two thirds of the world trade is actually managed by multinational companies. Now let's just have a quick look at Fortune, that has the top multinational companies. And usually in class we'll have a little exercise where I try and get you to guess the top companies. But here we can see Walmart is, by revenue, the biggest company in the world. Then we have some kind of Chinese groups, Chinese resources groups. Then we have Royal Dutch Shell, major petroleum company, Saudi Aramco, Volkswagen, BP, Amazon, and Toyota. So we have our major retailers, Walmart and Amazon, but we also tend to have quite a few natural resources companies here. So those are our kind of leading retailers. Okay, so I'll try and keep this brief because what is marketing? That's like all the courses that you've taken in the major. In principles, you probably talked about it in terms of the 4 Ps: the product, product design, price, pricing strategy, place, kind of the supply chain management area of marketing, and what we traditionally kind of call marketing, this idea of promotion and branding. Now, the idea about marketing is we're both taking information in from customers and we're pushing information out to customers. And in particular, a lot of marketing is involved in customer satisfaction, satisfying the customer. And I'm just going to kind of give you a little example in a minute. And I will just, using the example, will also say that marketing strategies, companies need to react and be proactive at the same time. So here's my little example with this. This is Kentucky Fried Chicken, and literally in 2018 in the UK they ran out of chicken. They changed their supply chain, they changed one of the suppliers, and they basically messed it up. So this was a kind of an example of a reactive advert of KFC was saying, hey, we're sorry to our customers. They're putting it out there, and they're putting it out there in kind of a humorous fashion. Now, funnily, if you were to count supply chain as part of marketing, which a lot of people did, that area did not go well. The planning did not go well. And obviously, they were not being proactive enough in designing their strategy. So again, we'll talk about it more later in the class, but a lot of marketing is reacting from consumer complaints, monitoring consumer conversations on social media, finding out things that are going wrong with your product, finding out things that are going wrong with your services, and then proactively planning for the future, designing new products, designing new services, improving your customer service efforts. So that is marketing, what you guys are all studying. Now, the evolution of global marketing. So I'll just kind of illustrate this with a little example. So I know Starkville has a lot of like kind of memorabilia stores for college sports. I know there's like a company that just makes like stone bulldogs for the Mississippi State market. So imagine that I'm my stone bulldog company, and I'm kind of making bulldogs for Starkville. Now, there's no way I've saturated the US market. I'm just in Starkville, I'm just in Mississippi. So I start expanding to other markets. I start making badges in Wisconsin. I start making goods for different mascots, and maybe I go into broader sports memorabilia, and I slowly, maybe over a period of like 20 years, become a major supplier for US college sports. Now, the US has a lot of expatriates all over the world, so almost indirectly, I begin to kind of export it. I kind of start exporting to other countries. For somebody who really misses their bulldogs, so I kind of export them a stone bulldog for their birthday. So we start off by exporting. We have college fans in other countries, and we have what we mean by ethnocentric orientation. It just means we're kind of focused on US consumers. If we get some sales somewhere else in the world, yeah, it's a good thing, but we're not really kind of focusing on them. We're focusing on our own kind of home country consumers. But then maybe we actually sell a sporting good. Maybe we buy a similar company in the UK. Now, UK, we just don't care about college sports. It's like a university game is like 10 people stood around the field watching university sports. It's not like it is in the US. So this company kind of focuses on professional soccer, rugby, on cricket. So it has a very, we've got a similar market. We're selling similar goods, but it's actually quite different. So we have to, we have to have quite different marketing strategies in the UK than we would do in the US. So this is what we call a polycentric orientation. It sounds fancy, but it just means we just got different strategies in different markets. And multi-domestic marketing, we'll talk about this later in the course, we're considering each kind of market quite separately. We then get to multinational markets and we begin to consolidate. So say, for example, we have lots of countries where soccer is a major sport and we have similar ranges of products for these countries. We will consider those countries as one group and develop marketing strategies for that group of countries. We'll begin to pool resources. A little bit like I talked about with our different car companies and the car company alliances. We have maybe one company in the US which is focused more on kind of larger cars, SUV crossovers. We also have maybe part of our company is in Europe where we have much smaller cars and we have a lot of more, say, for example, hatchback cars. And then finally, we get to a global marketing strategy. And with this global marketing strategy, we have this global perspective. We're thinking about the world. Now, it's kind of quite hard when you have quite different products, but we begin to try and find commonalities. We begin to think, hey, sports fans, they want certain promotions, they want certain product ranges. How can we design a marketing strategy that will fit all of this market? We can never be completely global if we have quite strong cultural differences, but we start to think more in a global fashion. And then from the book, these words, standardize, we begin to standardize. Maybe we have a standard factory that produces all of these ornaments in a similar way, but we have slight adaptation for the type of ornaments. We'll have our bulldogs in Mississippi. We'll have maybe Manchester City ornaments in the UK. But we begin to kind of coordinate, and it depends on what you're selling. Certain products, maybe business products, business software, is pretty standard. It's pretty global. But other things, for example, food, fashion, are a little bit more culture-based. And I'm not going to test you on this diagram, but this just kind of summarizes what I've been talking about. This move from domestic marketing to export, to international marketing, to multinational marketing, and to global marketing. Okay, so final little section. Global marketing doesn't mean that we can develop products anywhere for anybody. In Mississippi, there's not the demand for ski gear that there is in Colorado. So things like geography and climate actually affect what products we can sell in certain markets. Also culture. For example, I probably couldn't sell alcohol products in a strict Muslim country such as Saudi Arabia. So even though we have increasingly global markets, the environment within the country still requires a certain amount of localization. You know, despite the local internet, despite e-commerce, which are, you know, increasing economies of scale and giving us savings, we still have this kind of quite localized in terms certain products. And the next slide, I kind of give you a few examples. For example, mobile communications. If we think of like, you know, Nokia in Scandinavia, Scandinavia has a lot of heavy damp snow, took down landlines. So there was a need for mobile communications along with a highly skilled technical savvy workforce. So Scandinavia was an innovator in terms of mobile communications. Going back a long way, to kind of 30, 40 years ago, Japanese consumers, Japanese language has quite complex characters, a need to be able to reproduce those characters, hence fax machines. And Australia, very outdoor-oriented population. So we have Quicksilver, which is a brand for kind of sports, extreme sports. Now, again, if I was doing this in class, I would then ask you to get in groups and ask which product would be developed in Mississippi. But I will leave you to ponder that question.